Are you interested in angels, demons, spirits, ghosts, and monsters? Are you curious about their origins, tales, and influence upon history and on the present day? If so, sit back, relax, and welcome to Southern Demonology, the podcast that explores all of this and more. Hello, all. Welcome back to another episode of Southern Demonology, and as always, I am your host, JJ. Shining Kwaila, Akamashite Minato Gozaimasu, or, if you speak English, Happy New Year. I really hope that this coming year is going to be much, much better than the last two. Although with the way things are looking, that may not shape up from a public health standpoint, but we can only hope. I'm not going to give too much of a long introduction this time around because I really do want to focus on part 2 of Christy's amazing interview on Aramaic Incantation Bowls. It was a really good conversation. If you haven't checked out part 1, I highly recommend it. But this time we're actually getting more into the meat of the matter. Part 1 was not only around some of the stumbling blocks that one can face when actually studying any religious belief in more detail, because more things come to light which may have been glossed over in whatever Sunday school or early morning education that you may have received from said religion. And then we actually started to delve more deeply into the incantation bowl themselves. And now she's going to give much more detailed information, especially some of the conundrums that one can face when dealing with Judaism and skull fragments. So I'm going to leave it there. I will let her speak for herself. But anyway, thank you all very much for joining. If you'd like to support us, please go on to our Patreon page, patreon.com/Southern Demonology, or join us on Discord. All of those links can be found on southerndemonology.com. And just for a brief little instant to let you know, I have actually revived our Twitter account. Not that there's a whole lot going out there, but if you're not on Facebook or if you don't actually subscribe to our podcast RSS, then you can find all of the updates there about what's happening on the channel. And I have even started a very fledgling Instagram account. Still not really sure what I'm going to do with that yet, but if you would like to, be on the ground floor for when I do start doing stuff with it, please feel free. But anyway, thank you all for joining again, and let's get right on into the conversation with Christy.
And those are really interesting because, especially if they're written in Jewish script, like you don't mess with dead bodies, and like why is a Jew writing on a skull?
Exactly.
And in the Berlin Museum, a gentleman named Dan Levine that taught at Southampton for a long time, and is like an expert on this. He went and looked at a number of bowls, or a number of these objects. Like in Berlin, I know that there are at least 2 skulls that are used the same way these bowls are, and at Penn State, there are fragments of a skull that you really can't read anymore because care wasn't taken, so it's all kinds of messed up, and it was in fragments anyway. But yeah, and so it's quite interesting that like what is to one make of this, right? And like the bowl that got me into it is what's called a curse bowl, because the vast majority, like 95% of these bowls are what are called like apotropaic or prophylactic, or for guarding or for blessing or for good outcomes.
Spiritual condoms, right?
Yeah, exactly. And my bowl is a curse bowl. But like not only that, but it's like human die bowl. Like it's bad. Like
Wow.
like it is it's about some dude named Judah, and I don't know who he pissed off, but he pissed off somebody really good. Like like it's like like your tongue swell up and like curse all your stars and planets, because like Zoroastrianism was still big in the area at the time as well. And so they took on like so much of this is like syncretism and like a melange of like the different beliefs around you, and it didn't, so it all kind of like melds together. And also like when one is attempting to get rid of an illness, it'll say things like, all the demons and Liliths, named and unnamed, all the male demons, all the female demons, all the male Liliths, all the female Liliths, and Lilith with the lowercase l is a term in that area for a demon as well. But apparently there's differences in these kinds of demons, but but you're covering all your bases because names matter, right? And so like, and they call out, Bagdana is a popular one to call out. They were, I believe, like a Mesopotamian, like king of the demons or something like that, like some big bad guy.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, call out like, yo, Bagdana, and like, you cut your shit off, and, and tell your buddies to cut it off too. Like, so just like covering all the bases forever. So because if you don't know the name of the entity that's causing the problems, like, all right, fine, I'm just gonna call all y'all out. And so I'm gonna get it somewhere, right?
Yep.
Like wherever you are, I'm gonna find you somewhere, because I'm just gonna call all of them out. And so yeah, and so like my bowl, mine is quite interesting because it calls upon like a god of death, and like it calls upon like this thing called a Yaror demon, which apparently is like something that's like not cited very often, and it's like a big scary, it's like the destroyer or like the devastator or something, or like the destructor is like one of the epithets. And so it calls out like Yaror and Mot, like a god of death, and all the spirits that reside in the cemetery, which is very interesting.
I haven't heard that one before now. It's interesting.
Yeah. And like, I like how like a lot of the literature I read like will casually mention, and like if you like Wikipedia or something, like, yeah, they were found in homes in here and some in cemeteries. No big deal. Like, no, that's kind of a big deal. Like you're being like, because like they're in the, I believe in the Babylonian Talmud, and I could be mistaken, I've been wrong once or twice, but it talks about how like there are two ways to be a necromancer, and like one of them is calling the spirit of like the entity to you, and then one of them is like utilizing that spirit to do something for you. And so by having this bowl or this, or this item or whatever, like the skull especially, right, either in the cemetery or from the cemetery, in that way you are utilizing that power, and you're not necessarily calling up that person, but you're still taking that power. And that was part of my argument with like my thesis as well. But I always found that very interesting, because like the and it's not something that I've seen referenced a lot, but like the idea with these like demons being bound is that you're binding their power. And like, well, why can't you be binding it to use it for your own, like, yes, you're binding them, but you're not doing it to stop it. You're doing it to redirect their power in a way that you want it to be redirected.
Oh yeah. In fact, you find that same concept within these Debtura Scrolls, which are made by Ethiopian Orthodox priests that belong to a certain sect of priests, and some of them sing in multiple voices. Some of them are dedicated to creating these types of protection scrolls, but the scroll was very similar. So they use red and black ink, which is inherited from Zoroastrianism with their magical text. They call out every single demon they can think of, from Shotalai, which is a substitute for Lilith with a small L, which are a race of baby-killing demons. You have Barya and Legawan, which are the two snakes that form up Ouroboros. A whole slew of other entities in which they're kind of trying to protect against. But the way that these scrolls are prepared is the priest will ritually sacrifice a goat, skin it, take and some eggs and some alcohol, put it onto a rock, lure a demon because they're tempted by these objects, capture it within the seal of Solomon, and then imbue the scroll with the demon's power to funnel God's will.
How fascinating.
And honestly, I mean, this is all just first blush hearing this because I don't know much about the incantation bowls, but there's a crap ton of similarity there. And I don't know
Yeah.
if it comes from, particular religion, particular practices intermixing, or if a lot of this was just borrowed from the shared environment and kind of passed on. But it would be fascinating to actually dig in and figure that out.
Oh yeah. No, I mean that's the thing too. Like magical papyri and like amulets and stuff from around the same time are found in Israel. No bowls, but written things, and like lead amulets or whatever that are like longer, that have these same formulae, that have these like the exact wording, the same exact wording. And we know that obviously because that's around the time when the Babylonian and the Jerusalem Talmud were being written and being codified.
Mhm.
And so like we know for a fact that there was travel and discussion between these two groups. And so like, no, I think that's absolutely fascinating.
Well,
And
even like, because a lot of Ethiopic practices were being followed along the Silk Road, and you have a lot of different cultures kind of coming together. I mean, modern Arabic actually borrows about 60% of its vocabulary from Ge'ez. And you actually find like, so one of the things that scrolls often protect against is called Buddha. And yes, that comes directly from Buddha, which is the evil eye. And in fact, you find the evil eye referenced even within like Turkish Islamic communities. The
and
eye
the
of
and
Horus.
the bowls also reference the evil eye. Like it's a huge thing in like quote unquote Middle Eastern cultures or
Oh
Near Eastern
yeah, I
cultures.
mean that's like one of the biggest things it's
Yeah.
just that the Ethiopic just persecuted another religion in order to make their case for it.
Right. Well, and like
Anyway,
and
not
that's
here or there.
no, that's fascinating because like like we with the bowls with like eggshells, for example, found inside of it. Like what does that do? Like because there's not an egg in it, it's just the eggshell. There's no dried egg, right? It's just the shells. Like what are we doing here? And
Well,
like the
and the other
stand.
thing I was going to ask you about
Yeah.
is, um, so in the Essenes, the Dead Sea Scrolls,
Mhm.
you have the teacher who is often making these proclamations, but they kind of believed that it was the corners that would allow a weak spot so that entities could flow into them. So I'm wondering if that also might be a reason why they would put the bowls in the corners, not just to define the room, but also to shore up the places where
Yep.
stuff could leak in. I don't
Yep.
know.
No, like that is exactly yes. I'm I've from what I've read, like that's exactly it. Like the corners are the weak spot for some, for some reason. And so like if you don't find, it's not uncommon to find them in all four corners.
Mhm.
But there will be at least, if you find one in a house, it will be at a corner. And
I'd be danged.
more rarely it will be, where a bed would go. But that one almost like I would say 100% will have to do with protection during pregnancy or childbirth. And so or someone that was chronically ill in some way, because it'll mention that these like attacks have been ongoing, and so that person obviously is bedbound in some way, and therefore can't move, and therefore that's where the demon gets right. But no, it's fascinating that you mentioned that. Yeah, like they're found in the corners, and the stand, from what I understand, again, like I haven't kept up on the literature the last like 3 or 4 years, but it's my understanding that the general academic disposition is that one takes the bowl, one goes to the scribe, one says, I need protection against this thing. Scribe writes it out. Sometimes scribe is illiterate. You can tell, like they didn't, and so
Actually,
and
did you
then
find any like forgeries that were just complete gibberish rather than.
Funny you should mention that. So yes, there are some that it's clear that the scribe was copying the letters, the quote letters, but there's misspellings or whatever, and like so like it's obvious that they didn't know how to read or write, but they could copy it. But inherent in the bowls as well is what they call like butchus magicae, or or characters,
Mhm.
and it's basically like rubbish words, like nothing, gibberish, like it's like I'm gonna call on the angel of Gabriel and Michael and like SKY. Well, this guy. What's the one? It's like I think it's like Shin Yod or something. Like that's not a word. Like it's SYSY.
Oh
Like
yeah.
that's not
In,
like that's not a word, and that's
in
not a
fact,
person.
I mean, in almost every single like different pseudepigraphal book or whatever text that you're dealing with, you'll have the four standard archangels, and then when they try to just make up random magical words for the last three because they're never agreed upon ever. It's
Yeah.
awesome.
Like but in the bowls, these nonsense words are repeated in different bowls. Like,
Hmm.
and that's what I found interesting. And I was speaking with a professor of mine one time, because sometimes, so it'll be these like the nonsense words are repeated throughout these different bowls, so clearly they had like there was something going on for these same words to be repeated, in
Hmm.
my opinion. um but also there'll be just a repetition of like a certain letter, like it'll be like y, and like usually that like the y is short for like for the tetragrammaton.
Yeah, tetragrammaton.
That one.
Yeah,
I got
trust me,
excited.
I get tripped up on that word
um
all the time.
I just say the yod hey vav hey because that's just easier. Like just in my Hebrew class, I said Yahweh one time, and my professor said, don't say that. And I said, say what? Because
Oh,
I was just reading the sentence. And he was like, no, you don't say that. We say Adonai, or we say something else. He's like, you never say the Yod Hey Vav Hey.
well, they even allowed Adonai because I've been in some places in which you can't even say that. You'd have to say like
Really?
Adonai. Yeah,
Oh, how funny. No, it
yeah.
was Adonai, and
Because
there's a couple other ones that
oh,
we
I
were,
know. Like most of the Kelohim instead of
yeah.
Elohim. But yeah,
Oh,
because
really? No, we could say Elohim, but we couldn't say Yahweh. And he was like, well, if you say it he's like, if you happen to say it the right way, then the world's gonna end. And this is probably about 3 years ago, so like right before right before the plague. And I was like, well, Professor Reeves, I mean, is that really such a bad thing? And he just looked at me and he was like, keep reading, please.
oh my gosh. Well,
He's so
that
great.
especially since that the Tetragrammaton is really supposed to be 72 letters, and we have lost what that means after the first temple was destroyed, supposedly. I don't know. But I went to Hebrew classes with a whole bunch of extremely religious
Oh,
Jews, and they would not allow certain words because and as a result, I got really like kind of cautious about what I call things.
yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, he's so cool. His name is John Reeves. He teaches at UNC Charlotte, and he's amazing, absolutely amazing, and he's brilliant. But yeah, so like, there are these nonsense words and these like repeated syllables, for seemingly no reason. And uh, um, I was speaking with a professor friend of mine because so the general thought is that you have the scribe write something, and then you go home and you bury it, and you're done, no problem. But there are symbols that have been found now, that have been translated, that mention a magician or the magician, and some of them even differentiate between the magician and the scribe. So those aren't necessarily the same thing.
Hmm.
Um, just like you're not necessarily Jewish if you get an Aramaic bowl, or you're not necessarily Mandaean if you get a Mandaean bowl, and which I also find interesting. But
It just goes to show that there's a marketplace for this stuff. I mean,
right. Well, I mean, but Jews shouldn't be buying these bowls for from other people, right? Because
true.
right, and Jews especially shouldn't be using skulls for them either,
Hmm.
right? Um,
Oh yeah, I mean,
like
especially since after the Second Temple, there, I think this is right. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but there were no red heifers anymore. And a red
Yeah.
heifer is necessary in order to create the ashes for the ritual of purification. And
Yep.
that's why the corpse touching, how that was such a big no-no.
Hmm.
That was the only way to get rid of that contamination. We were just having a discussion on this in our Discord server the other day. And yeah, and that's now in inactive rule because there are no red heifers anymore.
Well, yeah, exactly. And like, and it's my understanding that like when there was a red heifer, like they because you only need a little bit of the ash, right? And and so like they keep the ashes around, like because they're so rare. But I remember a few, I say a few, within the last like 10-ish, maybe 15 years, like there was a red heifer born in Israel, and like everybody freaked out and was like, oh shit, now the temple's gonna get rebuilt and blah blah blah. Like, and of course, that didn't really happen.
Yep.
But yeah, but like that just goes to show, like, like the defilement of the, from the dead is a massive thing. And also like within Second Temple Judaism, it can spread. Like, so you never let anybody die inside your house because they were all built like apartments, and
Yep.
the uncleanliness or whatever, like, will travel through the wall and infect somebody else's house and travel because it's not stopped by those barriers. So if somebody's about to croak, you drag them out into the courtyard and let them die there.
Yep.
So like, cool. And then you have the people that are designated to come take care of the body, take care of it, and then they'll do their thing and be fine again.
Especially amongst the priests, the Kohen, because they'd have to travel everywhere and they would touch everything. And
Yep,
it was very easy for them to become corpse contaminated as a result. And,
absolutely, absolutely. And so so that's, yeah,
but yeah, to find skulls, especially
yeah,
amongst the Jewish tradition, is just
yeah,
wild.
yeah. I saw that and I was like, hang on a second, like, hold on. Um, and and so yeah, so like my theory for some time, and it's easy to sort of cherry pick your, what you read to be like, I was right. So my theory for some time was like, so that the idea is that, nobody did any ritual, nobody did anything. They just like wrote this thing in the bowl and you went home, you buried it, and that's fine. And you're done. And Erica Hunter wrote, a scholar named Erica Hunter. She teaches at University College London, and she discussed in one of her articles that she wrote, that she believes that there was something to do with water, like some kind of there was a ritual of some kind, and there was something to do with water, because like they're all bowls, like you can get lots of things, but and I forget, she was talking about a specific formula that was used, and I can't recall right now, but it necessitates like certain actions that one would take, and like one of them involves like water, and general scholarship is like, no, because the ink would run off and whatever. And she was like, if the ink is dried, because it's not written on there and then fired in a kiln, it's written afterward.
Mm-hmm.
And so, general scholarship was like, no, because the ink would run and whatever. And she was like, I don't see why the ink would have to run unless you're like messing around in it and like mucking it up. Like,
Well,
if you
yeah,
just
and
poured
that's
some
what.
water in there and poured some water out, then I don't see why that's a problem. And my other professor, talking to Shimon Gibson, who also runs the Dig Mount Zion project, and he was like, he's like, you might want to look into something. Like, what if these like repeated words, these nonsense words, like, see where they're repeated within these formula? And he's like, could they, because Judaism is song, right? They have the cantors, and he's like, in the Jewish ones at least, like, perhaps this is part of the ritual, or part of a they would sing this in some way, or recite something, and like those nonsense words, those letters are a marker, like, oh yeah, stop and like do this other thing now, and then go back to reading it, and then stop and do this other thing now.
Oh, that's
And I was like,
fascinating.
yeah, I was like, oh man. And so, and like being in, he's like, you used to do music, didn't you? And I was like, yeah. And he was like, yeah, so why don't you look into that? It might be interesting. I was like, oh, don't mind if I do. I haven't gotten very far on it at all. By far, I mean at all.
I know how that goes.
But yeah, and so I quite like that idea, and like, because you could just say, I invoke all the angels named and unnamed, right? It's the same formula as, I condemn all the demons named and unnamed or whatever. Or I invoke, this power, that power, because that's the verbiage in the bowls. Like, but that's not, like, that will be there. But again, those nonsense words or those letters will be there. Like the Y, yeah, like I said, will be, is usually understood as like shorthand for Yahweh. But these other things that are found in so many of the bowls, like there's no explanation. Like literally, there's just a footnote, like, this is gibberish. We don't know what this is. Gibberish, nothing. I don't know. Like, and so I find that quite interesting. But yeah, and like I said, like there hasn't been, like recently there has been some decent work done on the iconography in the bowls. And that's, like I said, like that's what drew me to the specific bowl I was looking at, and I ultimately presented at the American Academy of Religion in 2015, I think, on James McGrath's panel, who I also met on Reddit randomly when I was doing research for a paper on Doctor Who. And I was reading his book on Doctor Who at the time, Doctor Who and Religion, and I didn't know who he was, and I was just like talking to him like a normal person, and I found out who it was. I was like, oh God, oh no. And he's like, no, it's cool. Like, call me James. I was like, I'm so sorry. He's like, no, it's cool. It's cool.
That's amazing.
Yeah, like Reddit's pretty cool, man.
Accurate. That's how we met. So
right. And
not that I'm special by any means of the word.
Oh, whatever. Oh my God. But yeah, and so like my bowl was about like a figure in one of the bowls that again is a curse bowl, and like super major, like F you and die, and then die some more. But my paper was about how it was similar to a figure in what's called the John the Baptist cave, in the Kidron Valley, that Shimon and James Tabor excavated in the late 90s, early 2000s, which is like a whole different thing. I've been working on this like paper about John the Baptist for about 1 million years. But there's a number of engravings like on the wall inside the cave on the plaster. And one of them is a figure that Shimon argues is John the Baptist. And he wrote a book about it called The Cave of John the Baptist. And so my argument was like, okay, like my guy in this bowl is close enough to the guy in the cave. And so if that's the case, what does that mean exactly? And, unfortunately, nobody really had any commentary on it, but which is kind of what I was hoping for, and because I was sort of just getting into the bowls at that point. And nobody was doing any kind of work on the iconography really. And so I might have a different reception now. But
actually, so I got one last question for you.
Yes.
We have ran over by a good bit. No, because it's just been too fascinating. I couldn't stop, even if I wanted to. It was just too much good stuff. Have you seen images of your bowl or the actual like physical object itself?
Yeah, I've seen images of it. It's from, so the fun part about that is that it's from a private collection, and Shoal and Shaked mention it, and I can send you the links and stuff if you want to put in the description or whatever, or just for your own amusement. But they mentioned that the bowl is from a private collection, and the collector said that it supposedly comes from Bethany.
Really?
Yeah, and then of course like Shoal and Shaked, who are like the big granddaddies of like this whole thing, like they're the first ones to like really actually write on it in like the quote unquote modern era, like 70s, 80s, 90s. And they're the ones that taught Dan Levine, who taught a guy named Bayro now, that sort of has taken the lead now that Levine's like pretty much retired basically. But yeah, and so they're like, yeah, that's what the collector said, but we think that it's really, there's no reason for us to believe that it's actually from Bethany. There's nothing about it to lead us to believe it's from Bethany that differs from these other bowls in Mesopotamia. But I still thought that was quite interesting. And like, so like there's that X-Files part of me that's like, I want to believe. Because like, he's so like, he has like the same like pockmarked like tunic look. Like he has very similar, like the way the head is drawn in the cave, like is very odd. to the point that some people still believe it's like a Roman centurion like helmet, and not actually like a face as such. But yeah, and so I'm like, okay, and that's where I got on the whole like, like maybe if we, you're binding it not so it stops working, but you're binding it so it does work, but it works for you and not whatever it wants to do, right? And so and my argument for a bit too, oh hell, like I'll send you a link to the paper too if anybody's actually cares that much. I'm not that hard to track down, so I'm not really worried about it. If somebody really wants to find me, they're going to find me, and I'm not really concerned. I've had scarier things.
If you can turn the bowl against them, I mean, my God.
There you go. There you go. Like, I'm like, what's up? But yeah, and
but in looking at like images of these things, have you ever felt like a chill go down your spine? I'm just curious because I have held these scrolls and there is just something about them that just chills me to my bone, and I don't know why. I shouldn't be scared of a piece of paper, but there's just something on some of these things, and there are ones in which are just complete gibberish. You can tell they're just completely made up, they're false, whatever, but there are a few in which just looking at them, nevertheless holding them, is just an otherworldly experience. I was just curious if you ever got any kind of similar vibes off of them.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had the opportunity to hold them. At the British Museum, you can request to go into the archives with someone and like look at them. You have to have certain credentials, like depending on what you're trying to do.
Right.
Or you have to have like letters of rec to do it because it's the British Museum, and these things are kind of a big deal because British Museum. But it was actually really cool. Like I'd been there before to the BM, but it was before I started my bowl thing. And then after I started it, the next time I went to London, we went to the museum, and I didn't specifically like look up where they were because I knew they were on display somewhere. But like the first ones that you find are really unassuming when you're walking into like an area that looks like a library, basically. And they're kind of like down, like on the left, like kind of like at knee level for me. And so I happened to like look down, and there was one of them, because again, like they're small, they're really kind of easy to miss. And I happened to glance down, and there was one that's like on like the cover of one of the books that I was using, and it was on display, and I was just like,
oh wow.
And I just stopped. I was like, oh my God. And like whoever I was with was like, what? Because like there was like a big suit of armor like next to it or something. Like, what? And I was like, oh, that? And I was like, no. I was like, that's a bull. That's what I was telling you about. And so like, yeah, I'm like, that's the closest I've gotten to like being like, sort of chill, or like, that just like holding like, oh my God, they're real. Look, that's a thing. And I know what this is, and I know what that's supposed to be. Like, and also that, like, I have imposter, just like anybody that's in academia, I have imposter syndrome, like, out the wazoo. And so I was like, I know a thing.
It's amazing how a small object can excite you so much. And I don't mean that in a sexual way. Like I remember going to the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and because we were, intelligent, that was where you had to go for a socially acceptable time out. Anyway, it would normally be boring as ever live in hell. However, there was a small display case filled with old South Arabian seals, and they're normally jewels in which they have all the letters carved into. And I literally could sit there for like an hour and stare at these things because I'm like, I can read that, I can read some of that, I can read some of that, and it was just awesome. And my friends would look at me like, what the hell are you doing? This is boring. I'm like, well, go then. I'm happy doing this.
Yeah, we'll meet up later. No, like when I finished my undergrad, so I added on another like year or two to my undergrad because I wanted to go to Chapel Hill and study under airmen. And Chapel Hill, like, we have to be like more accomplished than I am. Anyway, and so I took French because like they require you to have a second language, whereas other schools are getting away from that. But anyway, so I took French. So my last semester of my undergrad was it was a full load. It was 4 classes. I was working like 50 hours a week at the friggin' Starbucks. because I needed health insurance, and I was like taking all, senior level, first year grad student level French classes.
Yep.
And so it was really fun, like when we'd watch like films, like, or like there was some film that came out that was in French or something, and so like I was watching it and I was like, yeah, the subtitles say that, but actually what they really meant was this and this and this. And like, I'd like stop it and like, well, actually what they really said is this, and there's more nuance to it. And so we need to understand that. And like my boyfriend at the time was like, and we met in like a lower level French class. And then he's like, okay, that's cool. Can we watch a movie now? And he was like, I'm really proud of you. I'm very, very proud of you. But can we just watch a movie and like chill for a second? Like,
oh, yeah, honestly, that's why no one can watch anime with me, because I'm sitting there watching it. I'm like, oh God, I've written like tons of articles in our Discord just about all the weird stuff that you find, and everyone's like, I don't care. No
exactly.
one ever
Yeah,
responds.
me and my mother was the only one who cared about this. Like, and she could just go, I'm proud of you, honey. And like, you have no, even before she got my mom stroked out about a decade ago, and then it turned into Alzheimer's and yada yada, and so that's what happened. But yeah, like, so even before she got sick, she was like, I don't know what you said, but it sounds real impressive. I'm proud of you. Thank you, Mama. Thank you, Mama.
I think that's honestly, in most cases, that's the only acceptable thing that you can say.
Yep. And so
Well,
like nobody knows about this, nobody cares, and so that's why I'm stoked that you asked me to come on, because I'm like, oh, somebody besides me cares about this.
Okay,
all right.
So this was so much fun. We do have to bring this episode to a close. I may actually have to divide it into two. But we are, if you are open for it, we're going to bring you on, because I know that you've also have done a ton of work on John the Baptist, which you've alluded to, but I would love to get some more information on that, because especially any Mandaean kind of references or associations,
and Dead Sea Scroll references as well.
See, there you
let's
go.
Let's talk about the Copper Scroll.
Heck yeah! Oh, love the Copper Scroll. It's such good stuff. Dead Sea Scrolls, bringing that back in for a little bit. But anyway, thank you so much for your time. This was awesome. I hope everyone got to learn, and especially I will say this just before we go. I have always heard of these bowls as described as water bowls. And so to find out, just to hear that a lot of people were saying, oh yeah, you don't really use water, especially when water is the ultimate sign of chaos. That just kind of blew my mind. So anyway, that's one of the things that I found so fascinating. I got to learn a lot. Thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge. It was absolutely awesome, and your phenomenal personality. Way the hell funnier than I ever hoped to be. But anyway,
you're awesome. No, like now you're really gonna like make my ego go out of control. No, this has been a blast.
You're freaking awesome. I don't blow sunshine up people's asses for nobody. So there's always a reason. But anyway, thank you again. And I hope you all enjoyed it. Christy is in our Discord. So if you have any particular questions that came up from all of our various talks, please pop on, say hi, ask your questions away. If there's enough, we may just go ahead and create a specialized channel so that you can ask these things. And she will be returning again if she hasn't gotten sick of hearing my voice already. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Southern Demonology. Find us online at southerndemonology.com, where you can find all of our social and podcasting links. Also, if you have a moment, please feel free to rate this podcast and leave any encouraging feedbacks that you may have. As always, I am JJ, and it has been a pleasure getting to talk to you today.